Welcome back to another edition of Songs of the Ozarks, a project of the Ozarks Studies Institute, an ongoing initiative of the Missouri State University Libraries. I'm Emalee Flatness, and today's date is February 9th, 2023, and our special guest today is John Fullerton, or Cowboy John.
Well, howdy.
We are meeting here in the Morgan Chapel on Shepherd of the Hills property, a very special place.
This is a beautiful building.
Yes.
Yeah, and so honored that it got saved and got brought here.
Certainly.
Yeah.
So, tell me a little bit about how you first got started in music.
So my driving influence was my grandparents, my dad's folks. They had a gospel quartet, performed here locally for well over 40 years. They got their start back in the 50s, singing out of paperback hymnals in their home church, which started in Branson's first one-room school. Now that sits across the street from where the Dick Clark Theater is right there. There's a little park next to Dolly's Stampede, and so that was Branson's community church way back when, and we're talking early 1900s. You didn't have all the denominations yet. Branson didn't see the first branch off until a little later, but anyway, the family band, as I call it, got their start there. It was my grandfather and his sister, along with my grandmother and another lady. And to me, they were superstars. They were still in their prime. When I was a little guy growing up in the early 80s, they structured their sound very close to the Chuck Wagon Gang. It was a ladies trio. Grandpa sang bass. Their instrumentation was super simple. It was just nothing more than my grandmother's guitar. She played a 1950 Epiphone flat top 7.9 model built in New York. That guitar roared and still does. And so, you know, I didn't really take an interest in singing with them until high school, and by that time they had went to a trio, and I was trying to find the missing harmony part, and never could quite get it locked in because my grandma would alternate between alto or the tenor. So we were always bumping notes, we were always clashing, and so, but that was my foundation. They recorded a group album, only one recording. Got that LP here, and this was done in August of '77. They did 12 songs in one take, which was absolutely nuts. This is my Aunt Ruby on the left, my grandpa's sister. My grandmother is the second one there. Third is Miss Evelyn Layton that sang tenor, and then my grandfather Wallace Ford.
Oh, wow.
So that was the old Branson Quartet. And I talked with my Aunt Ruby before she died about this session, and she says, I didn't think we was ever going to get through it, because it's very rare for a studio engineer to put a band through 12 songs, boom, with no break. I mean, the custom is usually 3 to 4 songs a day, but there was a tight budget, and it was a fly-by-night outfit out of Iowa. A miracle it all came together, but they had piano, banjo, and another guitar for kind of no bass player, but just locked in harmonies as solid as could be.
Do you know where they distributed those albums?
So they took these with them to all the revivals and singings that they were a part of, and their sets back then were never more than 4 or 5 songs a set. They weren't a concert act, you know. When we had community sings in this area that would rotate at a different area church every 4th or 5th Sunday. So they were part of that same circuit.
Oh, wow. So your roots are really deep here in the Ozarks. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
So here at the Shepherd of the Hills property, I've got a direct connection through one of the characters in Harold Bill Wright's novel. I've got a connection to Fiddlin' Jake. And this man was a nutcase, but he was a railroad worker. And when the railroad had started construction in 1902 and 1903, he was a part of the crew that helped in the clearing of right-of-way. On the side, though, he's helping everybody to feel good. He's running a moonshine still and had a great moonshine recipe. Well, anyway, he marries an Oklahoma girl, and she couldn't stand his drinking, so she ends up dumping him. They had several kids together, And that young lady ended up remarrying my widowed great-grandfather who just lived right over there. And they married in 1921, and my grandfather came out of that.
Wow.
So, yeah. But Fiddle and Jake actually came to work here at Shepherd when this property started really taking off with visitors. Lizzie McDaniel, the third owner, decided to do a live theater troupe portraying the novel using a cast, and they did it in the front yard of the cabin during the summer. So the real Fiddle and Jake was a part of that, just to basically handle crowd control and be the greeter. And he came in every day during the summer season just to help with that.
Wow.
So,
What a neat connection.
yeah.
So did any of your other ancestors play music besides?
So back to my dad's folks,
Yeah.
the family quartet. Granny's daddy was the co-founder of the Bald Knobbers,
Wow.
the hillbilly musicians.
No kidding.
So that was Mr. Chick Allen.
Okay.
And Chick Allen had a little museum right over there down the road called the Wash Gibbs Museum, and this building was 100 and some years old, full of Indian artifacts and awesome antiques, but things that had an Ozarks connection.
Yeah.
And he decided to start the Bald Knobber show with, at the time, his son-in-law, Bobolink, was the banjo player. And it was Bobolink's brothers, and they all sang and played, but they wanted that hillbilly roots image, bib overalls and all. And that took off, and here's now, a community that's turned into a live show, Capitol. And I think my great-grandfather was very much a far-sighted individual. I know that Chick Allen saw that coming. He was born in 1905 over here in Stone County. So he saw what the railroad did. He saw what the Harold Bell Wright novel did. He saw the float fishing industry, but times was extremely tough, in the rural settings around here. And Chick Allen made his income digging fence posts and building fences for farms. And this was at a time when our area was no longer open range. They actually passed a law that the territory had to be fenced off, and if you had your 160-acre farm, you had to fence it off or you got in trouble. So he was a part of the fencing project and all that for a lot of Stone County properties.
Wow. Yeah. It sounds like your background not only comes from a lot of music, but a lot of farming.
Farming and cattle ranching on both sides of the family, yes. When my mom's family was up here at Garber, my grandfather, born in 1922, as he became a young man by the early 40s, he was buying all the neighboring homesteads around him. Either these families had passed away or moved away. And by the time I came along in the late 70s, my grandfather was running a large-scale cattle operation on over 600 acres. That land today is now a part of the new Shepherd of the Hills State Park property.
Wow.
It'll be coming soon. So yeah, cattle ranching on both sides.
It's funny how all of your connections kind of go back to same little circle, Shepherd of the Hills.
Yes, yeah, it's really something on both sides of the family.
It is something. So this farming that you grew up in, did that kind of help you decide to go on the path of cowboy music as opposed to bluegrass music?
It definitely did, yes. But you brought up a fine statement there, because I did steer off the tracks and played professional bluegrass for a while. And I had to learn to sing Bill Monroe Kentucky Bluegrass.
Wow.
And I taught myself. Now you're going to love this. I did not take any inkling of bluegrass interest until the day Bill Monroe died.
Really?
When all that press came in September of '96 regarding his death, I was glued to the Nashville network for 2 weeks, catching all the tributes. And Branson still had the Ernest Tubb record store.
Oh, really?
Back then it was over here in the mall next to Walmart.
Dang.
And so they had box sets and all of Bill's recordings in studio master quality. And that's where I first heard Rawhide, and that's where I first heard the Kentucky Waltz and all that stuff. So I blew all my spare money, bought all of his studio recordings dating back to 1936 going forward. And my grandpa's brother on dad's side of the family, my Uncle Rondo, had an Epiphone strand mandolin. This was one of those, had an oval-shaped sound hole, had the little parallelogram inlays on the fretboard. It was built in New York, and so his son had passed away back in the 60s, and this mandolin had been sitting in his case in the bedroom under the bed.
Wow.
And I remember one day my uncle calls me up and says, "Come over, I got something to show you." I arrive, and here's his son's mandolin sitting in the living room, and he says, "You've taken such an interest in Monroe and this bluegrass type of singing, and I especially, I got to tell you this, I especially loved Monroe's sound when it came to the gospel and the hymns, because he had such a sound with that 4-part harmony, and it was nothing more than like Lester Flatt on guitar, Bill on mandolin.
Right.
No other instrumentation was needed because the voices did their part."
Right.
And I was learning all those. I was learning Wicked Path of Sin and Little Community Church and all that good stuff, you know. And so Uncle Rondo says, "I want to give you this mandolin so you can, further this experience and get started on the right trail." So that's the direction I went, and I was still doing the cowboy thing and singing the Sons of the Pioneer songs too, but I got really comfortable doing bluegrass, but I was singing the little old lady part up high in the tenor.
Oh my goodness.
Back when I was much younger and I could sing way up high, I hire young kids like you now to sing tenor parts for me. So anyway, but back then that's what I did, and I got hired in 2001 on 9/11.
Really?
I was hired by the Springfield-based bluegrass band Waterloo Boy and actually auditioned for them on the evening of 9/11.
Oh my goodness, that's a date to remember.
Yeah. And I had no idea what I was getting into. This was Nelson Pruitt and Pete Sturpey and Pete's wife, Linda. They had a fiddler that had worked with them in the past, but he was kind of off and on. Smilin' Jim Smith up in Urbana that had worked with Lee Mace up there at Lake of the Ozarks for such a long time. But back then, Smilin' Jim was the banjo picker. I didn't know anything about his fiddling, had never met the man, and so about my third rehearsal with Waterloo Boy, putting all this together for appearances in 2002, Smilin' Jim shows up. And that was the 5-piece ensemble we went with, and then we discovered Chad Graves.
Oh, awesome.
And Chad Graves, just starting out, but really getting his foot in the door as a dobro player. This kid never slept. Chad was up all night on all of our road dates. If we were at a bluegrass festival, he was at someone's tent jamming. And that's where he got to where he is today. He just would not put the dobro down.
Wow.
And I stayed with him through about 2005, and then John True replaced me. And then they kind of fizzled right after that. But that was the most enjoyable time, being gone 30 weekends a year. And I saw our share of fun, and I saw our share of problems from the fans, because Waterloo Boy brought a lot of variety to the plate. Everyone loved their bluegrass sound. They had a great harmony. And the very first time I ever watched them, I was blown away with their vocal blend.
Wow.
But Nelson and Pete thought, why don't we put some of your cowboy songs in the set? If you want to make diehard bluegrassers upset to the point where they'll actually get up and walk out of a room, oh, believe you me, it happened to us.
Oh my word.
We'd break into Ghost Riders in the Sky. No response. We'd sing Tumbling Tumbleweeds. They would sit there. So, in 2001, I had been asked here locally to start a one night a week solo cowboy performance at a resort. They were doing an event called Taco Tuesday, and the fellow behind all that was a real good friend of mine, and he had actually played here as one of the cast members in the play here at Shepherd, John Spencer. And so he says, "John, I need someone that can just sing for 75 minutes, play guitar, and tell jokes. Do your thing. It might last a year, it might last 3 years." Well, lo and behold, it lasted 17 years.
Wow.
And it was called the Western Roundup. And I was at a different Branson resort property all that time. then the Sons of the Pioneers called me in January of 2018, and I've been performing with them full-time since.
Wow. So, tell me a little bit about your origins as an individual, as a musician. How did you first start playing guitar?
So I had first been piddling with the piano.
Okay.
But here at Branson Elementary, when they gave the 5th grade students the option to go into grade school band, they started us, 3 months recorder band. And we are learning our fingerings on the recorder, learning the notes, learning how, learning music theory in general. Well, I decided I'm going to make this easy in case I ever get turned around and need to get back in place. I'm going to memorize each individual note by its sound. So when they started us with the fingering of B natural and going to A and going to G, I memorized those notes. And then piddling around with the piano at our church, well, there's those same notes. So I could peck out from memory, all by ear, melodies to any of the old hymns out of the church hymnal. And so my mom is now thinking, okay, if you're going to be this serious about piano, you really need to learn, hand etiquette. Mm-hmm. And so formal piano lessons took place for me for just shy of 2 years, but I clashed a little bit with my very first piano instructor because I've got this perfect pitch thing going. Mm-hmm. And so she was just shaking her head that a 6th grader, 7th grader can do that. So my last piano teacher in 1990-91, she was over here at the College of the Ozarks campus, and I wanted to take my time because I wanted to be the church piano player, and I wanted to learn kind of that end of the fundamentals, but she couldn't really teach that. But she knew I was on my way and I wasn't far from it, and she told my mom one afternoon, Mrs. Fullerton, let your son rehearse on his own. He's going to be just fine.
Aww.
So, because she thought mom was wasting her money, because I was terribly bored with what I was having to go through with just basic piano lessons. Mm-hmm. I knew what the chord structure was and could play any song in any key and was just fine.
So you learned to read music and play by ear?
Both, yes.
Awesome.
Yes, but all of that led to me picking up guitar, and by the time I was in 8th grade, I started as a lead player.
Awesome.
Just to get comfortable with that. And it was very simple. It took me a long time. I wasn't around really any good guitar players to learn licks from and get those tricks all down. I wasn't exposed to that until quite a bit later, late 1990s after high school, by the time I had gotten into the bluegrass side of things, where I started seeing what some other guitar players were doing, and I discovered that, okay, what Lester Flatt was doing when he was doing that G chord, he's putting his 3rd finger on the B string and making a G that way. And so, and how to drop and make a C major 6, all of that little stuff. I finally learned what was there, and man, it sounded so good, it sounded right, So that was the direction for me. I also started piddling around with mandolin. Yeah, mandolin by the time I was in the 6th grade going into 7th grade, but I got a little bit bored with it because, again, I just wasn't around anyone who knew bluegrass mandolin at all. And then also while in high school, a fiddle player at our church owned a K stand-up bass, and he worked here and played the Fiddle and J character here at Shepherd in the play, Kenneth Fowler, and his grandson was in this as well, and the two of them kept pushing me, you really should consider bluegrass, and I every time they brought it up, I shook it off because I was wanting to learn the Sons of the Pioneers cowboy sound and those harmonies and structure. And then here Bill Monroe passes away, and I thought, well, here's my opportunity. I might as well just jump into the pool and let's figure this out. But I was very excited, and I was very dedicated to it. And then I got acquainted with John and Betty Wynn up in Ozark. Because everyone here in Branson, if you had an instrument malfunction, you went to John Wynn for repairs, period. well, one of the Sons of the Pioneers, Sonny Spencer, was playing a wind mandolin, and that was the first time I'd ever seen a wind mandolin up close, and man, the thing had such a sound.
Wow.
And right before I had joined Waterloo Boy, I was on the quest to find a wind mandolin. And when I found out what John was charging for a new one, I thought, oh my dear Lord, this is going to take ages to come up with that kind of income. But I knew his craftsmanship was spot on, and I knew I'd have a mandolin for life that would do everything I needed. Well, so we started spreading the word that I was in need of a wind mandolin. Well, I had gotten acquainted with Bob Hammonds when he had his gospel group, Green Valley Grass. They had came and done concerts at our church, and man, I just loved what they were doing. And Bob invited me up to his house one day. He says, John, I hear you're in the market for a wind mandolin. Come up and I'll show you something you might be interested in. Well, I get to his house and he's got 2 wind mandolins. I thought, what? You know, what's wrong with this guy, you know? But Bob had both of them laying out, and he says, I'm going to sell them both. If you want to buy both, you can, or if you want to buy one, no biggie, pick the one you like. Wow. Well, this one that I picked up first had the bark, and it had been sitting in the dressing room at the Old Field Opry untouched for quite a few years. Had belonged to Hugh Gibson, who had played there for a long time. And the mandolin was built in 1985, and man, it just had a punch. And so, best $900 ever spent right there, believe you me. And so that I have never touched or even considered another mandolin besides that one. And I would take it back to John for checkups every year. He always did my setups and checked the frets, and now Barry does that with his little magic touch today. It still gets serviced at least every year, and it still just barks. Barks to the point that when I was with Waterloo Boy, depending on the size of a room we were in, sound techs would say, dude, you don't need to be anywhere near the mic. We can hear it.
Wow.
It would actually, that mandolin could actually overpower any banjo.
Wow.
In tone and just the depth in its volume.
Real Ozarks instrument.
Yeah, it had that sweet spot. You just can't go wrong with a hand carved unit like that.
Oh.
So, yeah.
That's amazing.
So that's how I became a wind mandolin owner.
Oh, wow. So, tell me a little bit about why you think that bluegrass is so much more prevalent and maybe associated with the region than cowboy music is, or even country music.
Well, it's really interesting because at a time, the cowboy music here in the Ozarks was on top.
Really?
Thanks to KWTO and KGBX in Springfield, because all of their live talent went that direction thanks to Slim Wilson and the Goodwill Trio, morphed into the trio that Speedy had on the Ozark Jubilee that became the Tall Timber Trio, and all they did was sing these Sons of the Pioneer songs and yodel in harmony. And it was amazing that fellas here in the Ozarks could make a living singing music off of a California-based band such as the Sons of the Pioneers. Well, Rex Allen, the Arizona yodeler out of Wilcox, Arizona, a great movie cowboy, but he kind of got into the movie run late in the game. He was doing quite a bit of work in Springfield in the late 50s and early 60s as the Jubilee, Ozark Jubilee had started to phase out and became the 5-Star Jubilee series. Rex was one of the in and out hosts during that short run. Well, he took Slim Wilson and Speedy and Bob White and took those fellas on the road with him. So the Ozarks had that foundation. We didn't really start seeing the bluegrass foundation around here until well into the 1950s. But Chick Allen's idea to get the ball knobbers off the ground, part of it was because of the success of the Jubilee and the fact that it was starting to wind down. And we were getting a new wave of Branson visitors going into 1960 because this brand new Table Rock Dam over there had just been completed, and so now the community has flip-flopped. We are now officially a major lake and swimming destination that's going to reach way over what Lake Taneycomo ever did when it was a warm water setup. And of course we know that Table Rock killed everything downstream on the Taneycomo side. Rockaway just vanished, going to a cold water situation. And so that was the basis for Chick Allen and Bob Mabe getting the vault numbers off the ground, was because there was not a single activity for families to do in the nighttime hours. So they wanted to portray, though, that hillbilly in sort of bluegrass image with a fiddle and a banjo. And how in the world Lyle Mabe, and I've seen it done up close, it can be done. You actually can mount a wash tub and a broomstick with a 3/4 inch rubber band and actually get great notation that is pitch perfect out of the thing. And he had that touch and knew how to do it. So, it's interesting how those two genres of music had the Ozark connections. Now, let me also back up and say that in Springfield, Gene Autry had some roots there when he was working for the Frisco Railroad. And his future wife was a Springfield girl.
Wow.
So, Ina Mae Autry.
Wow.
Yeah, so Autry loved coming back to the Ozarks. And then actually two of the early members of the Sons of the Pioneers, Ozarks connections. Tim Spencer, who was a killer songwriter, wrote Roomful of Roses and a jillion others, was born over here in Webb City. The Pioneers' longtime tenor vocalist and rhythm player that was with them for 41 years, Lloyd Perryman, grew up down here in north central Arkansas, actually real close to, it's not hardly even there anymore. It was in Izard County, a little town called Ruth, Arkansas, over by Zion. So two of the founding pioneers with Ozarks connections, and they end up spending the rest of their lives as cowboy singers and songwriters.
Wow.
So it's unique how that balance happened right here in this part of the Midwest.
It is. Could you describe the difference between cowboy music and country music?
All right, I'm going to lay it on you. Cowboy music, you're going to be dealing with anything that is going to involve the beauty and the grandeur, the wonderful landscape of the American West, but it's going to also deal with cattle drives and working cowboys and everything that they do. Country music and all that other stuff is simply what I call bib overalls in a way, or you could even extend it to what it's become over the last 60 plus years. To me, country music is lying, crying, cheating, and dying.
That's good.
And you will not get any of that in this cowboy music. You'll get your good dose of well done love songs in the Western vein. Roy Rogers sang a gob of them. The Pioneers have done gobs of them too, but they always had that authentic quality in their music because they wanted to portray it right. And when you saw them in the movies portraying it, they did it right. They did all the writing scenes that the studio would let them do. They wouldn't do some of the major chase scenes. They would require stunt doubles. But for the simpler stuff, all the Pioneers were on horseback, and it was real.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Whenever you travel, do you see a difference in reception to cowboy music here in the Ozarks? As opposed to in Texas or up north?
I here in this immediate area, because we are just so oversaturated with music in general.
Yeah.
I don't think it has the drawing power here that it once had. But once you get 150, 200 miles out of here, it's a different thing. Yes.
Right. Even whenever you go to places in the Ozarks other than Branson, do you see a difference?
Very much. Very much. Even great example is up here at the Oldfield Opry. Fine example. There's just a greater appreciation because it's real and it's not scripted.
Yes. Could you tell me a little bit about the Oldfield Opry while you're on that topic?
So you'd have to talk to Bob Hammonds and some of those guys about that, but I know that he was a part of it for a long time, and John Wynn was one of the regular players as a banjo player. on that. And I got invited up there when I was just starting out in bluegrass. Just they give me a 5-minute spot. I had a garage band, and they would let us come up, every week, every other week, and give us just a moment. And it was a great stage experience because, believe you me, we was just as green as could be, and we badly needed to be in front of an audience just to figure things out. But it took off and is still still really a major thing in that community to this day. It's great that it's lasted all these years, but they've had some great players come and go that have kept it alive. They're very passionate about it.
Something I've been talking about in interviews with bluegrassers is the jamming culture. Do you find a jamming culture in cowboy music as well?
In the areas where it's more prominent, most definitely, and I see it big time when the pioneers and I go out and we do cowboy poetry gatherings or Western music film festivals. A big time jam session presence behind the scenes. The pioneers and I have really seen here in recent times the roots, what they're calling the roots Americana sound. We've really seen that take off, and we were invited to go up and do one of these style festivals in Seattle back in the winter of 2019. Worst snowstorm we've ever drove through to go to a gig, but we lived. And this Hyatt Regency Hotel property, whatever it was, had all-night jam sessions in the elevators. They had like floor 3 and floor 5 designated for jams, and it was all kinds of acoustic music, from the cowboy angle to just simple fiddle and banjo stuff. Yeah. But just blown away. But for cowboy jamming, I do see it more in the Western themed and cowboy poetry festivals. The one that's out there in Elko, Nevada. If you've never done the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering, put that on your list, because there is a great edge on the musical side of all that, and everyone shows up for the jamming opportunities in that.
Wow. Which genre would you say is more regimented or strict in their style, bluegrass or cowboy music?
Honestly, I think both.
Really?
Both have their own certain amount of strictness. There's that certain set of guidelines that you've definitely got to follow between the two. Now, you'll see some of these bluegrass bands that will kind of take the Western swing side of the spectrum from an instrumental standpoint and really give it that bounce, which is super cool. The first band I ever saw do that around here was the Chapmans when they first came to the area. They were playing swing music on bluegrass instruments, and I had never seen that done before. So it's almost like that the two genres are almost distant cousins in a way.
Wow.
Just from that acoustic standpoint. But the Western music definitely has that Texas fiddle following, and that was the style that the pioneers decided to go for and play those wonderful closed chord patterns all over the place, because it fit what their fiddler was doing, and their first fiddle and guitar player were both from a little place called Ranger, Texas. Hugh and Carl Farr. If you've never seen those two, oh my gosh, they were as important to the pioneers as the vocal trio was.
Wow.
So they never got in the way of the singers. They complemented everything that went on. And it always blew me away in watching the pioneers when they would do television appearances. They would gather around 2 mics, one for the vocal trio, one for the fiddle and guitar, and then the bass player stood in between all of that.
Wow.
And the sound they got, oh my gosh, just couldn't beat it. So soothing.
What is the difference? I know I keep asking you about differences, but it's so intriguing to me between like Bob Wills' style music, Asleep at the Wheel, and the music you play.
They're almost identical in a way, except that the pioneers, what we do, we are more heavier on the vocal blend.
Okay.
The vocal trio, the pioneers have always been labeled as a singing group because of that trademark vocal sound. when I saw the Pioneers the first time in 1985, and I was 7 years old, and my grandma literally drugged me to this thing. I had no idea what I was in for. I had no interest in any of this, but we were about 10 rows back center, and my grandmother is on the edge of her seat this entire concert, and she is loudly singing out loud all the Sons of the Pioneers favorites. They were still selling their long play albums back then, and she had to grab one and get it all signed, and of course that comes home, and next thing you know, I have ripped the shrink wrap off of that, and the whole last half of second grade for me was spent, my spare time was spent dissecting that album and getting familiar with those lyrics, because Granny had collected all the old song books, the sheet music, the folios, and so she had the words to Ghost Riders in the Sky and the lyrics to Cool Water, Tumbling Tumbleweeds, Empty Saddles, everything.
Wow.
So I just head dived into all that, but on that particular long play album, the vocal trio on that, and I think it was probably one of the best vocal trios that the Pioneers have ever had. And they've had some great ones through the years, but these three fellas right here, this is Lloyd Perryman with the guitar. The fellow down low in the dark hat is Tommy Doss, and then up in the middle there in the silver belly hat is Dale Warren. These three fellas, all three of them were natural baritones, but any of them could sing top tenor down to the deep bass. And there was just such a flow the way they enunciated and their projection and everything. They ended up lasting as a vocal trio in the Pioneers for a long time, early 50s up until off and on about 1972.
Wow.
They did all the RCA recordings, and I thought, this is just wow. So I patterned my vocal styling after those three right there.
Seems like it worked out very well for you.
I don't know that. I'm still trying. So,
Did your grandma get to watch you with the Pioneers?
she did.
Oh my goodness.
She did. She passed away in January 2022, a little over a year ago.
Wow.
But when I came into the Pioneers in early 2018, we actually did a brief concert run here at Shepherd for a Chuck Wagon Dinner show, and she was in hog heaven that entire evening. Yeah,
I bet.
Granny was hands down the best cheerleader I could have ever had. Her dream was to be a KWTO performer, and unfortunately she was just a little bit late in the game because they were starting to really phase out live radio by the time her music career took off in the late 40s. And then she married my grandfather in 1950, and everyone around here was all excited about the Table Rock Dam project and the repositioning of highways. That was the moneymaker. You had to go to work. You could not make a living in the music business. And as we have heard the stories from those that have interviewed the Baldknobbers and the members of the Presley family when they started in this town, they all had day jobs for a long time while still doing their shows at night. You know, it took some time to get it all off the ground.
Certainly.
So, yeah.
Could you tell me the story of how you got hired to play with the Sons of the Pioneers?
So I really started at the very bottom, if you want to put it in that particular context, because I had gotten acquainted with all the fellows through the Branson years, going forward through the late 80s. And then by 1992, my grandpa's sister that sang in the family quartet, she had relocated. We sold our little 105-acre family farm that had been in the family since the early 1900s, and sold that in 1992. And just the Branson boom was just absolutely nuts. And my grandfather and she, they just didn't want the city limits knocking on their door, so to speak, and they preferred the quiet rural lifestyle. And so when we sold and we all moved elsewhere, we all stayed right here in the area, but Aunt Ruby bought a house over here in a residential neighborhood on the north side of Branson. Well, next thing I know, this house she and her husband had bought is next door to one of the residences where the Pioneers live, and it's the Pioneers' lead guitar player. I thought,
Wow.
oh, cool, you know. So that was Gary LeMaster, and that friendship really took off, and Gary showed me a lot of things and helped me with guitar fundamentals, taught me on the side. I would go to their house quite frequently, And he would share with me, Gary would share little tricks. I would send him my demo recordings. Okay, Gary, how am I doing? Am I doing this right? Am I doing that right? Well, you need to do your breathing different here. You need to phrase this different here. And just little tricks that were so valuable. But the Pioneers Fan Club was still an extremely popular thing back then, even in the middle 90s. And they would sign up all the fans at every live concert that wanted to join the fan club. And of course, you paid like $5 a year for a quarterly, very professionally done newsletter on all the group's activities. Well, in 1994, the band was celebrating their 60th year of consecutive performance. And at that time, yes, Roy Rogers, the founder, Roy, was still alive. So they had scheduled this big reunion celebration in Tucson, Arizona. And I am just beginning my junior year of high school. Yes, junior year of high school. And here we are, they're going to have this in Tucson, and it's going to be in November. And so I told my family once it was announced that this event was going to take place, I said, we cannot miss this. This is being billed as the very last time that Roy Rogers, Dale Evans, and the Sons of the Pioneers are all going to be on the stage together. It's going to be a reunion celebration and just a big blowout. Well, it ended up being a 4-hour concert extravaganza at the University of Arizona campus. So it was like, wow, we got to go. So, you know, Dad's working construction. My mom's working on the side here in town. Money was tight to save up for a 1-week trip to make a run out there, and then can my sister and I successfully skip school for a week to pull this off too? So I just gutted up and I walked into our principal's office at Branson High School after lunch one day, and I said, Mr. Ritchie, this was like in September of '94, and I told Mr. Ritchie, I said, sir, sorry to bother you, but I've got a problem. I need your permission to skip for a week. The week of November 14th. Well, what do you got going on? I said, sir, the 60th anniversary Sons of the Pioneers reunion is happening, and Roy Rogers and Dale Evans are going to be there, and the Sons of the Pioneers fan club has asked me to write a review of the festivities for their fan club newsletter. And he's shaking his head, and he thought, oh my gosh, I didn't think anyone in your age bracket would even know who those people are. And he was so impressed by that, I'll never forget it. Mr. Ritchie says, keep up with your studies, get your homework done when you get home, and go.
Wow.
So
you impressed Mr. Ritchie.
So yeah, and he's still going. He's in his mid-80s now, and still lives here in the area. He was actually the Branson High School football defensive coordinator for a little while, also at Springfield Catholic and stuff, so he's big football nut. But anyhow, that's kind of where I got my start behind the scenes with the Pioneers through that affiliation. And in their concerts, they did something super cool. They would, from time to time, to give a song a little bit more flavor, they would show movie footage of the actual film that the song might have been in way back when. Mm-hmm. And by the way, the Pioneers have done just a hair over 100 movie appearances in all this time, and their music is still being used in modern day motion pictures. And I helped them in assembling film footage, still photography and stuff, because I had been on the side collecting all the Pioneer memorabilia and had come across 2 wonderful individuals, one in Tulsa, one in Brighton, Michigan. These people had used record stores. And I said, I want your Sons of the Pioneers list because I want to buy all their stuff. Wow. I spent 6 years, it took me 6 years to locate every commercial recording, whether it was on a 78, 45, whatever. And so that's where I really got into the dissecting of the songs and whatnot. So that was the beginnings of my affiliation, and then I just, while dissecting those songs, studied those harmony parts. And what I liked about that trio that I showed you with Lloyd Perryman, Tommy Dawson, Dale Warren, at RCA, they always put them on one mic. They positioned them to where you could hear the distinction of the three voices so well that you could clearly tell who was singing what part.
Wow.
And so sometimes a melody may be up here, and then it may go way down here. So a melody can move from a tenor range down to a baritone range. Well, they would pass the hat, so to speak, and let that melody float between the three voices. So for instance, when they're doing Tumbling Tumbleweeds, see them tumbling down, pledging their love to the ground. The tenor voice is doing that part, the other two parts are under that. You get to the next line, it goes to the middle voice carrying the melody. Lonely but free I'll be found. And then the baritone takes the melody on the last line, drifting along with the tumbling tumbleweeds.
Wow.
So that's how a melody would float. And it took a long time to get used to that and to learn it and to distinguish what was really the melody. And to this day, I kid you not, to this day, there are still some songs in the Pioneers Library that I'm still puzzled because I don't honestly know what the real melody is because of the way they pass it around in the three voices. Because that middle voice isn't always the lead.
That's remarkable.
So that's how, and they did it that way. Lloyd came up with that, and he did that so that the three singers would be singing in their own range and nobody ever had to strain. And that's what made it so soothing.
Right.
Yeah.
That's pretty special.
Yeah. So they called me in early 2018. Three of the members decided to step out and retire together. And so Dusty Rogers was asked to take the middle voice. I was called up about a little over a week after that and asked to take the baritone part and play rhythm guitar. And then we found a fiddle player out in Seattle.
Wow.
So the Pioneers are kind of more branched out now than we've ever been.
Yeah.
They were out in California, all within the Los Angeles area, Southern California, forever and ever. And then by the early 80s, it started kind of moving around a little bit. And then they made Branson their home for 6 weeks, and then that turned into 30 years.
Wow.
So when I came on, hired a new fiddler. Then we hired a bass player in early 2019, and he's out in Oakland, California.
Huh.
So then our tenor vocalist, who's been with the band 25 years, lives in Marshall, Texas, Ken Lattimore. So you've got you got Paul Elliott in Seattle, Chuck Urban out there in California,
It's a big circle.
Ken Lattimore down here in East Texas, and then Tommy Nally and myself here in this part of Missouri.
Wow.
How do we rehearse? We don't.
Right.
Oh, we do. Anytime we come up with a song that we want to dust off that we haven't performed in ages, I give everybody a work CD with their part on it, and you do this, you do this, you do this, I'll do this, you do that, kind of a deal. Work on your assignment, and when we meet together on the next road date, we'll spend the necessary amount of time, which it usually does not take very long at all.
Right.
And we can have a song. I can tell you this: we've got such a great group of musicians and singers. And they all do their homework. I'm so proud of all of them. We can have a song that we haven't done in 40 years and have it nearly polished in 30 minutes or less. Just running through it, as long as they stick to their assignment.
Do their homework.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's how we do it.
Wow. So, before I have you play a few, would you mind telling about your current connections with Shepherd of the Hills? I know you mentioned it's so important to the Ozarks.
So when Fiddle and Jake passed away here in 1951, my dad's mom, my grandmother, had actually worked here as a tour guide at the cabin in 1948 and 49. And the Lizzie McDaniel house here that she built before she passed was actually the home of the fourth owners, the Trimbles, who had gotten it from Lizzie's estate, And they actually had room in that house to put up a couple of employees during the summer months who lived on property full time during the week.
Wow.
And so my grandmother was one of those. And so she had the bedroom across the hallway from Mark Trimble there. It's now one of the offices in what is now our ice cream parlor building here at Shepherd. And so my grandmother did that for several years. Well, then my dad is all over the horse business as a little boy and becomes a professional horse trainer. And for years and years, trail rides had always been offered here at the Shepherd property. And one of our cousins on the Caulfield side had been the original livestock contractor for the play.
Wow.
And so my dad went to work under him as a kid. Homer Caulfield was amazing. So my dad got his foot in the door, and 7 days a week, sometimes 16 hours a day, my dad was on this property in some form, leading a group of visitors or breaking horses on the side for others. He did all of that right here. So my dad had a long affiliation that went all through his high school years, and then he went into full-time construction work after that. But then came back in the late 90s and helped in rebuilding of wagons and updating props and things that just needed done for Gary Snaden during that run. And right after COVID, early 2021, I had been acquainted with Jeff Johnson right after he came on here, and what a blessing. We got acquainted, and when he had the Pioneers come here in 2018, became real good friends, and I was looking for something else to do when I wasn't out on the road with the Pioneers, and I called Jeff up one day and I said, is there anything going on with the guided homestead tours here that used to be so popular? That back in the day, that was a huge thing around here. Well, as tastes have changed and times have changed, it just didn't have the drawing power that it once did.
Right.
But Jeff invited me to come on board, and having all the Shepherd and Garber area connections here, said, yeah, we'll let you be a tour guide. So I do that here when I'm not out performing, and Shepherd is my little home away from home, and I love every minute of it.
So awesome.
So, yeah. I'll tell you every secret about this place, and things you don't even want to know will get revealed. I've spent 20 plus years researching, because I wanted to make sure if I was going to give a tour here, I'm a big stickler about facts, and the facts being right. So I had been doing my research and interviewing family members and everything to make sure the story was going to get told correctly. Ended up discovering things that none of our Shepherd family was even aware of, or even some things that had become lost and forgotten. We didn't realize that there was an owner in between J.K. Ross and Lizzie McDaniel.
Right.
That was the football coach at Topeka's Washburn University, and he's the guy that made the cabin what it is now, and did more digging through newspapers and found out that he hired a guy from Fort Scott, Kansas that was a building contractor to come down here and live in the cabin and do the modifications. So the modifications were done over the course of 2+ years just to do the chimney, the new windows, and then do that screened in porch.
Wow.
So it was fun to find all the dates and how it all really came down. And here we are now, 2023. Do the math. This is the 100th anniversary this year of the passing of old Matt and Aunt Molly.
Wow.
She died on March 14th. Think about that.
Yep.
He died on July 14th, 4 months apart to the day. So if you come with me on the tour this year, that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about, just because everyone wants to know, old Matt and Aunt Molly as real people, not in their character mold. I mean, the book portrays them very, very, very well to how they were in real life, but I will reveal what came down in the aftermath of the book, what forced them to sell the farm, and those reasonings.
Awesome.
So that's what I do.
Awesome.
I love it. I really do.
You got some fun jobs.
It is. Man, it's exciting every day.
Right. Certainly.
I'm blessed. That's all I can say about that. So blessed.
So if you wouldn't mind singing a couple, I think everyone would love that.
Okay. Just random cowboy song, and it's a happy song. Now, prairie folks assure you there ain't nothing that'll cure you any quicker than the medicine they fix up for themselves. With their sulfur and molasses, pepper tea and mustard plasters, and their camphor bags and flannel rags that line the bunkhouse shelf. But here's one remedy that they use that never fails to chase the blues. Just try it for yourself and see the world get brighter. When you get weary of trouble and care, here's what a cow your troubles vamoose. Skies won't be cloudy or gray. No reason why you should worry or cry. Yippee, your troubles away. Scatter your woes with the sunrise. Everything's rosy and swell. Just sing a note through that lump in your throat. Greet the dawn with a cowboy yell. Here's what to do when you're lonely and blue. Make it a wonderful day. Cast your eye on the sun and the sky. Yippee, your troubles away. Scatter your woes with the sunrise. Everything's rosy and swell. Just sing a note through that lump in your throat. Greet the dawn with a cowboy yell. Here's what to do when you're lonely and blue. Make it a wonderful day. Cast your eye on the sun and the sky. Yippee, your troubles away. Yippee, your troubles away.
Woo! That was phenomenal.
With an out-of-tune guitar.
I think that really demonstrates the difference between country, sad music, and cowboy music.
Thank you. Yeah. A lot of the cowboy music is happy music.
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah.
Would you mind showing me a little bit of how you sing bluegrass? You don't have to if you don't want to.
Boy. So the vocal styling is it's really tight and it's hard to describe, and it's almost like even the breathing element has to be done differently. But the key thing is that you will very seldom hear a vibrato in my voice. The cowboy crooners, the Bing Crosbys, and all those people who did cowboy music, they had that smoothness to their sound, and it sounded really polished. And bluegrass does have that polish to it, but the edge with that vibrato clearly is not there. Jimmy Martin and Bill Monroe, when they sang "Sitting Alone in the Moonlight," I mean, and I ain't done this in forever, so this is probably going to sound terrible. Sitting alone in the moonlight, thinking of the days gone by. There's a little different presence in that. So, it's got that high, lonesome sound to it in the bluegrass sound, and the cowboy singers don't have that edge.
Awesome.
So,
Well, if you wouldn't mind doing a couple more if you'd like to.
Okay, hurrying, scurrying, what's the use of worrying? Life is a happy song from the world of care and strife. There I'll find a peaceful life far from the busy throng. There's a blue sky above and the land that I love out on the new frontier. There's a moon shining bright and the stars every night light up the new frontier. Moonbeams and starlight blending as one fades into daybreak. When night is done, I'll stake my claim there under the sun out on the new frontier.
Awesome.
These are songs that were done in the movies, and they were done on radio, and so many of them, though, especially in the Pioneers bag, were never never commercially recorded.
Wow.
Both of those that I've just done, never put on a major label by the Pioneers.
How interesting.
So they had a very gifted singer come along into the group in the late 40s. He had an acting bug going on the side, and I'm talking about Ken Curtis that became Festus on Gunsmoke, and the guy was pitch perfect all the time and just knew what he was doing. Ghost Riders in the Sky was the first recording he made with the Pioneers in 1949. But on the flip side of Ghost Riders was this pretty little love song, and then Mickey Gilley comes along and made a country hit out of it. But I'm going to sing it the cowboy way. Room Full of Roses. If I sent a rose to you for every time you made me blue, you'd have a room full of roses. If I sent a rose of white for every time I cried all night, you'd have a room full of roses. If you took the petals and you tore them all apart, you'd be tearing at the roses the way you tore my heart. If someday you're feeling blue and you should send some roses too, I don't want a room full of roses. No, I just want my arms full of you.
Wow.
So that's kind of the love song example that
That's a great
the
song.
Pioneers were so noted for. And that song made the hit parade, sold way into the millions. And then Tim, right after that came out, Tim gave his heart to the Lord and full-time went into the publishing of gospel music and spirituals. And Tim ended up being the first U.S. publisher for How Great Thou Art
No kidding.
in 1953. And How Great Thou Art did so well. And then when Room Full of Roses made the comeback, thanks to Mickey Gilley, then that put Tim's children in very good financial shape, kids and grandkids through college and all that good stuff. So yeah, Tim was a great songwriter, Webb City, Missouri. So,
Wow.
but then the Pioneers had Bob Nolan, who of course wrote Cool Water and Tumbling Tumbleweeds, and would just wander out into the Arizona desert. He went to high school in Tucson. Bob would just wander out there, close his eyes and listen and be writing poetry in his head.
Wow.
And Cool Water was one of those poems, and it just took off. They never even had thought of putting music to it until he got hooked up in the early days when they were starting the Pioneers. He would just one by one dust off a poem and just take it all the way. And then when they started making the movies, then the movie directors wanted him to write, and they wanted Tim to join in on that too, have both individuals write for the movies.
No kidding.
And they said, yeah, we'll pay you extra. So get this, the year is 1938. They're out there at Columbia Pictures Hollywood working with cowboy star Charles Starrett. They are also required to ride in the horse scenes, the chase scenes, be a part of the posse, but provide as many as 6 or 7 musical numbers per film, and they would write all original material for every film.
Wow.
Studios gave them $10 per song.
What?
Their salary for each Pioneer, $33 to $35 a week. So, and we're still making that today, by the way. That's
Oh no.
the pay hasn't changed. So.
Oh my goodness. So come out and give him tips at Shepherd of the Hills as your tour guide.
There you go. It's going to a good cause.
Do you have any other songs you like to play, or
Oh gosh.
anything you want to talk about?
We could sit here all day.
Right.
We've just barely got into the edge of the sagebrush today. But I grew up in that gospel, sound, and I've always loved that angle. My grandmother had a tune that she just dearly loved that fits this region. And Rex Allen used to sing it. Red Foley used to sing it. It's a slow one, but it's beautiful. God walks these hills with me. We all have treasures we call our own. Mine are these hills I call my home. Just let me live till eternity, for in these hills God walks with me. Yes, He walks these hills, these beautiful hills, where my soul is always free. What a comfort to know I'm never alone, for God walks these hills with me. Nobody sings that anymore.
No, I've never even heard it.
Yeah, big. It was in the '50s, a very big tune.
Wow.
Yeah, that's definitely one of my favorites of the spirituals and stuff. Yeah.
Certainly.
Granny used to sing that as a solo. After the gospel quartet with the family had fizzled, I told my grandmother, I said, you really need to consider doing a solo album. You've never done one.
Mm-hmm.
Pick out your favorite gospel songs well to try to get her to narrow down 200 plus songs that was up here, to get her to narrow them down to 16. She spent a whole summer in preparation for that, and I produced the whole album for her. I've got one of those 2005 model. It's a Fostex VF160, one of those 16-channel recording studios. Super simple. And so doing a multi-track setup, I helped her do all her instrumentation and just let her sing. And she put that song on there with a bunch of others. She was so influenced not only by the Pioneers, but her other driving force was Roy Acuff and the Smoky Mountain Boys. And she thought Bashful Brother Oswald was the greatest tenor singer on earth. and she patterned her tenor voice after that, but also she loved what A.P. Carter and that bunch was doing in the early days. You listen to some of the early gospel material by the Carter family. I kid you not, I think my grandmother is in that vocal ensemble somewhere. I hear her voice. It is the eeriest thing, and it gets me, I'm going to cry. It gets me every time.
Wow.
That was such a foundation for her. So anyway, yeah, in 2009, she did a solo album, and I said, Granny, being the harmony singer that you are, you've got some of these in the perfect key. Why don't you sing your tenor harmony to your own lead? I never thought of that. Is there a way to do that? And I said, well, let me plug this cable over here into this input, and you're good to go. And she wore her headphones, and she nailed it on the first take. Had never sang harmony with herself.
Oh my goodness,
So
so special.
she called the album Mother's Pumpkin Pie. I'll have to get you one of those.
That would be awesome.
It's divine. Yeah, it's a simple acoustic bluegrassish gospel collection of
I would love
her
that
favorite
very
hymns.
much.
Yeah. So,
Well, anything else?
thank you for inviting me to come over.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much.
This has been great, and let's do it again sometime.
Let's do it.
So,
We've got so much to talk about.
absolutely.
Well, this has been another edition of Songs of the Ozarks, and thank you so much, John, on behalf of everyone, for
Great,
meeting with us.
great to be here. Sure appreciate it.